I've decided to build a React app from scratch as just a review. So this is not something that you guys have to do or have to watch, but for those of you who want just a little extra practice with React, hopefully this will help. So let's get started. So this is going to be an app that uses the News API. Specifically, we're going to use the Search Everything endpoint, which is this endpoint, and you can use this to search through millions of articles, yada yada. It includes pretty much everything, and we can see an example here below. If we wanted to get all articles about Bitcoin, we would use an endpoint like this. So the key parts are going to be updating this Q equals Bitcoin part, and then updating the API key with whatever your specific API key is. So that's the general idea of it. And the end result is going to look like this. There's going to be two pages. The first page, our home page essentially, is going to have a simple little search where we enter in a word and click on Search News. And then when we click on that, it will render our search results. And it looks like I forgot to put that link in there. So let's click up here. No, wrong one. It's going to look like this. So it's going to render, it's going to map through all the articles, and it's going to render them onto the screen. All right. So that's the general look of this. And when we think about state, for an app like this, when we think about state, we want to think what sort of dynamic information is going to need to be stored in our app. So what data cannot be hard-coded, what is going to be inputted by the user, or dependent on what the user inputs. And so those two things are going to be whatever text the user types into the search input, and then the resulting list of articles. So in our this.state, we're going to have search and articles. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But that's kind of the overall idea of what we're building. So let's get started. We're building this from scratch, so we're not going to fork or clone anything. We're just going to start off with npx create react app news app. Okay, and when that is done, we're going to cd into it. And then we are going to add Axios and React Router. So we can do that in one line like this. All right, so now we've got our tools. So let's open up our code. And we're also going to run npm start. All right. So first things first, we're going to go open up our index.js, and we're going to import browser router from React Router DOM, and then we're going to put it inside of this render function. Make sure that app is wrapped inside of router, and we are all done with that page. So I'm going to save it, and I am good there. Then I'm going to clear out all of the default code from here, as well as from app.css. So I'll save both of those. Next, I'm going to turn app into a class component. So class app extends react.component. I'm going to wrap my return in a render function. And I'm going to add a constructor. Put super in here and .state. And as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be two things. Search is going to be a text input of whatever the user types into that search input field. And then articles is going to be a list of articles that we get from the News API. All right. So we've got sort of the basics set up. Let's check in on our instructions. So we imported browser router and we put it in. We got rid of our default code. We made app.js into a class component. It looks like we also need to add our API key, so let's do that. All right. So I'm going to grab my API key. You guys will enter whatever your API key is, and we'll be using that in the future. Anything else? Let's see. Nope. Okay. So now let's think about our basic structure. So this app, if we recall from the images, it's going to have a header, a footer, and 2 pages. So we're going to need 4 components for that. Header, footer, and then our search page, which is going to be that first one that has the input. And then the articles page, which will be that second page I showed you where we render all the articles. And so we're going to see the header and the footer on both of these pages. So we can just put them directly into our app.js render function. And then search and articles, we're only going to want to see one of those at a time. So we're going to have to use React Router and put those inside of some route components. So our basic structure is going to look like this. Of header. We'll have a little main that's just regular HTML. I just like to wrap the center of my page with something like that. It makes it a little bit easier to style later. And I have my footer. And then inside of here, I'm going to have my 2 routes. So the first one is going to be my home page, so I'm going to set it as exact path. And the render for that is going to be my search page. So I do a little function here. And, oops. Make sure that I close my route. And then, oops, dang it. Then I'm going to do another one of those for my articles. Cool. So that is my basic layout. Now obviously if I try to look at my app right now, it says header is not defined, route is not defined, search, all of these things are not defined right now. So let's get to that. So I'm going to have to actually create all these components, and I'm also going to have to import route from React Router DOM. Alright, so I've got route down. Now let's make some actual components. So I'm going to add a folder called components into my source folder, and I'm going to make header.jsx, footer.jsx, search.jsx, and articles.jsx. Alright, let's start with the easy ones. So my header component, it's going to be relatively simple. It's going to need to have our app's title, and it's going to need to have links to both of my pages. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in. So I'm importing React, I'm importing link from React Router DOM, and I'm doing a regular functional component, and inside of my return statement I just made a header box, and I have an h1 for my title, called it Newsfinder. I'm using one of my link components from React Router DOM to set up a link for my home page, which is going to be that search page, and I'm setting the link to as just a slash. Then I have a link to articles to see the search results. And I'm going to make sure I save that, and if I look back at app.js, those link tos match up exactly with those ones from earlier. I actually don't need an exact here. It's not really going to do anything wrong, but it's kind of overkill, so I'm going to take it out. Alrighty. So next is my footer. This should be even more straightforward than my header was. Oops. Alright, so I'm importing React. Oh, whoops, I called this home. Better fix that. I don't know. That was probably a copy and pasting error from earlier. So I'm going to call it footer. And then I'm just going to have a footer box, and I'm going to have a p tag in there with a copyright symbol, a dash, and my name. So I'm going to save that, and that is good to go. Alrighty. Next, I need to do my search component. This one's going to be a little bit more complicated, so we're going to want to think about this. We described this earlier in the directions. So the first page will need to have an input where a user can type what word or words they want to search and a button they can click on to execute that search. And then we'll need to use a function to track what the user types in the input and a second function to execute the actual search, which will use the news API. So we're going to need to have an onChange event connected to the input, and we'll, let me see. Oh, and our button is going to need to have an onClick event, and it's going to also have to take us to the articles page. So yeah, there'll be an onClick, and there will be an articles, and it's supposed to say wrapping it in a link component. So I'll update that after I finish filming this. And these functions are going to be written inside of app.js and then passed to this component through props. So we're going to go ahead and have props written right away when we do this. So let's copy and paste this in, and we'll walk through it. So my search component. So I'm importing React. I'm importing link from React Router DOM. I have a regular functional component. I'm putting props as an argument here because I know I'm going to be passing those two functions as props. And then I set it up. So I made a box. I gave it an ID of search. And first I put in an input element. And so it's just a text element because it's pretty simple. I put a placeholder there that says enter search topic. And then I set up an onChange event listener. And I wrote props.handleChange. I obviously have not created the handleChange function yet, but I know that I'm going to use one here. And then beneath that, I have my button. I wrapped it in a link component. So that way when you click on this button, it's going to link you over to articles. And on top of that, there's going to be an event listener on this button for click events. And that will fire a function that I'm going to call handleClick. And then I just have the text that we see on my button, and that is it. I close my link, and it's good. So I save that, and I go back to app.js. And at this point, let's see. Oh, I still haven't imported them. So I go to the top of app.js, and I'm going to import each of those. So import header from /components/header, and then let's see, I have search, articles, and footer. So now if I go here, I can see my app. It's pretty ugly, but the basic pieces are laid out. All right. So let's see what comes next. Oh, I still need to update articles. Luckily, I didn't get an error because articles only shows up if I go to 3000/articles, and now I get an error because I have not set that up yet. So let's do that. So for articles, so article is going to map through all of my articles, but I haven't really done any of that yet. So for now, let's just keep it kind of simple. So we will import React from React. We will create a functional component. I'm going to put props there because I know that I'm going to be passing that list of articles from app.js over to this component eventually. So I'm setting myself up for later. And for now, my return is just going to be a box that I've called articles. So now let's create some functions. So I already imported all of that stuff. So now I need to create the handle click and the handle change functions that are going to go in our search component. So let's start off with handle change. So I'm going to do this in app.js, and I'm going to put that beneath my constructor function. So we'll do handle change equals and a function that does something. So my handle change is going to need to track what the user is typing in. And so to do that, we're going to have to track the event object. So anytime that we're using an event listener, so anytime that we're using something like onChange or onClick, we get access to the event object. And we don't have to write the word event here. We can write anything. By default, the first argument that you type here will stand for the event itself. So by convention, we're just going to write event because it's really easy to understand. And so we want to know what they type. And so event.target tells us which element is being interacted with, and event.target.value, when we use that for an input, that is going to tell us exactly what text is being put in the input. And so we are going to want that text to update search, right? Because they are in the search element, there's an input, it says enter search topic, we want their search topic to be saved. So whatever they type is going to update the state to fill this value in. So we know that we're going to want to use this.setState, and it's going to update search, and the value is going to be event.target.value. So that's all that we have to do there. Now we're also going to want to pass this down to search. So we're going to just stick with the name handle change. It's just a convention. We could call it anything we want. And we're going to write this dot handle change. Now what's important is that this needs to match this. This and this go together, and then this goes with this. So this word has to be the same as this word. We can use any word that we want. We're sticking with the convention here, but it's just important to remember that because it makes it a little clearer to understand how exactly this stuff works. So now we are passing this function, we're naming it handle change, and then inside of search, we're accepting props, and out of those props, we are grabbing the thing called handle change. So now, when there's a change to this input, the handle change function that we defined right here is going to fire. So every single time a user types any letter in, it's going to slowly update this search. So then, once they've typed in their search, they're going to want to actually do the search. So that will happen when they click on that button. So we're going to make a function called handle click. Okay. And during this handle click function, we are going to actually hit the news API at that endpoint that we were looking at earlier, and we are going to use that response to update the articles in our state. So since we're using Axios, we need to do two things. We're going to import Axios from Axios, and then we're going to make this an asynchronous function. So then we'll do const response equals await axios.get, and now we need to put that endpoint in. So We actually have that written right here. So let's grab this. All right. And you can see that I've set the query to equal, so earlier in the example it had Q equals Bitcoin for their example if you're trying to find articles about Bitcoin. So I'm going to want to grab the search inside of this .state. So I'm going to do this .state.search there, and then I'm also going to put in my API key, which I defined earlier. So then let's see what that does for us. And it looks like I spelled response wrong up here, so let's fix that. All right, so I'll go into my app, and I'm going to open up my DevTools, open up my console, and I'm going to just see if this works. So Halloween, search news, and it looks like it did not fire, so let's figure that out. It's possible it's not firing because we switched over to the home page, but let's check this out. So let's first check out and see if our handle change is working. All right. So in between our render and our return, we can write small functions to check things out. We don't usually want to write big functions here. That should be written above. But little things like a console log are pretty great here. So this .state.search. Let's see if that's actually updating as we're typing. Oh, okay, it looks like that part's working. Oh, I see what happened. All right, so our handle click, we forgot to pass it down to our search. So let's do that. So handle click equals this dot, this dot handle click. And so once again, this name has to match this name, and this name has to match this name. All right. So now let's try this again and see if we can get some info. Halloween, search news, and there we go. So it gave us an object back. If we open it up, we can click through it. Inside there's a data object, which has another object called articles, which contains a list of articles. And so a list of articles is definitely what we want to grab. So we can double check that response.data.articles was the path I followed to get there. So let's just try that one more time. Go back here, and we will type Halloween. And it looks like we just got a list of articles, so that's pretty solid. And we can investigate these in a little bit more detail when we're ready to map them, but for now, let's just save them. So we will save them as articles, and then we need to update our state with that saved variable. So this dot set state articles is set to articles. There's a shorthand where we could just write it like this and it'll do the same thing, but for the sake of being really clear, I'm just going to write it out long form. So articles will be updated with the articles. I take out my console log now that things are working. Alrighty. So it looks like all the functionality of my search component's working. So I think I'm ready to head over to articles, but let's just take a look. So we wrote our handle click. We passed props for both of our functions. So now we're ready to map through. So we're going to go to our articles component, and let's actually take a good look at this. So, actually, skipped a step. All right, we've updated our articles in state, but we actually need to pass that over to the articles page. So we'll do articles equals this.state.articles. And you notice that we're using this.state instead of just this dot, and that is because articles is inside of this.state. So this.state.articles is going to be the syntax we use to access those. And so, so this word has to match this word. This word is just something I chose. It could be anything, but articles makes a lot of sense since that's what it's going to be containing. So I'm gonna call it that, and that's the word that I'm going to have to use inside of articles. So let's take a look at that. So we'll do props. Oops. We'll do console.log props.articles to make sure that that's passing, and also so that we can look through and see what sort of information we actually want. So let's go back to our app, go back home, we'll type Halloween, we'll search. It's initially undefined and it's staying undefined, so that's not good. Let's try and figure out why that's happening. Now it looks like I just forgot to save in app.js, so let's give that another shot. Alright. Still remaining undefined. Okay, let's try and figure that out. So response.data.articles, articles equals articles. We have articles up here. Interesting. Oh, here we go. Looks like I wrote this in the wrong spot. I accidentally wrote it outside of the articles component. So I'm surprised I did not get an error there. It was reading that as though that was part of the route component, but I want it to be part of the articles component. So now I'll save that, and let's try this one more time. So I'll type in Halloween, click on search news, and now it worked. Cool. So let's actually look at one of these articles. We have an author, content, description, when it was published, some information about the source, the title of the article, a link to the article, and a link to the image. So for this, we're going to want to use, we are going to take the title, the URL to image, and the description. Alright, so let's go over to articles. So props.articles now equals a list of articles. So we're going to want to map through that. So we'll open up some squiggly brackets so that we can type some JavaScript, and we'll do props.articles to get our list of articles, and then .map to iterate through those. And so we need to use a placeholder word that's going to stand for a single article. So I'm going to use the word article because that makes a whole lot of sense there. And then function. Then we want to do implicit returns, so we're going to use parentheses here. And now I can map through. So I'm going to use a semantic element called article. So this is the same as doing a div, it's just a specific name. So this will print out each individual article. And as I was saying earlier, I want to have the image. So the source of that is going to be URL to image. So I use this word to show I'm grabbing the specific article that I'm on, and then I use this word to say that I want to grab that link to the image. Alright. Something like that. Oops. Alrighty. So that'll give me an image for each one. Underneath that, I'm going to want to have a title, and I'm going to just wrap the title with a link. So I'll do href equals article.url. And inside of that, I will do an h2, and I will have my article.title. And then beneath that, I'll have a p tag with the description. Alright, so let's see if that succeeded. So I'll go back here, click on search news, and it looks like everything's coming through. Although it doesn't look like my link is working, so let's take a look at that. Oh, spelled a little typo there. One more time. Alright. And now it looks like everything's a link. Oh, I accidentally wrapped my P tag in the link. Alright, one more shot. Oops. Kind of wish I chose a smaller word than Halloween, but I'm kind of locked into that one now. Alright, so yeah, I'm getting my image, my title, which is clearly linking, and then a description. So that's pretty good. It's pretty ugly. We can also see that I'm getting that key warning that we get whenever we're mapping. So that's telling us that it wants article to have a key. So we do key equals, and then we need any piece of information that is unique. I'll just use article.title. That's probably unique. And one more time. Okay, so that looks like everything's working and that warning is now gone. So that's pretty solid. So at this point, let's see, we're mapping through, did all that stuff. So at this point, we've basically finished up setting our functionality. Everything's working, it just looks pretty crappy. So let's start styling this thing. So to start off, let's just do some general styles. So we'll go into app.css and .app, if you actually take a look, is the name of our parent component. So this is sort of the ultimate parent for this app. So it has a class name of app. So I will grab it in my CSS with .app. And I'm just going to use text-align center because I know that I want my design to be mostly centered. And so this won't necessarily center everything, but it'll center it should center any text that's inside of any block elements, and it should center any of our inline elements. So for the most part, this will get inherited and passed down. So we can even go and look right now, and we can see that our H1 is now centered, although the element itself is not centered, just the text. Then also our two links are centered, and also most of the information in our stories as well. So, cool. Let's also adjust our links. So you can see that our links were just sandwiched together and they're currently underlined. So I want to fix both of those things. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of margin. And I'm also going to remove the underlines. So if I do that and I look back, alright, this is looking a little bit better. Okay, so next up, let's move to our header. So I usually like to give headers a specific height, so let's do that. I always do this in pixels. That looks pretty good. Alright. And is there anything else I wanted to do there? Order. Oh yeah. Let's give it a background color. That always helps. That helps us see everything a little bit better. I feel like I chose white smoke earlier, so let's stick with that. Classic Brian, white smoke. Alright, we can see that there's a gap between the top of our header and the screen, and that is coming from this H1. If we take a look at the H1, H1s have default margins on them, and that margin is pushing away from the top of the screen. So let's also adjust that. So we'll go header H1, and we will do margin 0. Alright, and that got rid of that margin, but now everything's sort of sandwiched up top here. So let's see if we can push it down a little bit. So we'll do some padding top. I'm just going to guess on the pixels. That's pretty solid. Can maybe do like 25 pixels or something like that. Alright, and then our links are like a little bit tight there, so let's also adjust those. I don't necessarily want to make my next, in fact, I should make this more specific. So we'll do, because I have links inside of my articles, so let's be a little careful and make sure we just are adjusting the header links right now. So we got rid of those, and I want to just do a little extra margin. So this does 10 pixels on every side, but let's do 20 pixels on the top and bottom and 10 on the sides. And you know what? In order to push it down, we'll have to do, you know what? I got an easier way of doing this. Let's push them down from the H1. There we go. Alright, that looks pretty decent. So now I can flip back and forth between these two things. My header's staying the same. Cool. So we notice that when we're on our home page, our footer is already visible, like barely a quarter of the way through the page, so that's pretty crappy. So let's move on to main. So I put that main element here earlier, and the main reason that I do that is so that I can do this. I'm just going to set a minimum height, and I'm going to use view height. So as we can see, that pushed our footer down. We might even push it further, but for now, something like that should work pretty well. Alrighty. Next up, we have our search and our articles. So let's start with search. Alright, so if I look at search, I'm inside of main, and I have search, and it's just like a little thin bar right now, so let's actually give this thing some shape. So we want it to look like a little box. So we'll do, we'll give it a height, I don't know. We'll give it a height, and then let's give it some width. So we'll do okay, we can't really see anything, so let's also give it a border. Alright, so now we can actually see our little box. It's crammed over to the left here. We kind of want it centered and moved down a little bit, so let's actually make that happen. So in order to center it, it's a block level element, so we'll do margin 0 auto. And now it is in the center. And we want to push it down a little bit. So there's a couple of ways that we can do this, but I think one of the ways that's going to work the best is by actually pushing it down from the main element. So we'll just give some padding to the top and bottom of main. Let's try a large number. We'll do 0 on the left and right. And that's pretty solid, and that pushed our footer down far enough so it looks like we won't have issues there. So now we have this box, and we could probably do a couple improvements to it, but for now it's better than it was, so let's move on to the specifics. So now we want to do the input and the button. So we'll do search, input, and search button. We probably want to give each of these their own unique styles, but there's also a fair chance that some of the things are going to be exactly the same. So we want these to be on their own separate lines. We want them to take up, we want them just to be a lot bigger. So let's start styling them out. So to start off, we'll do display block. That's kind of an easy way to make them stack up. And now let's give them some width. So now they're a little bit wider. Let's give them some height. A little bit bigger. Let's give them some borders. Alright. And then let's just make sure that everything is sizing out right. So we'll do box sizing, border box. Alright, so now they are pretty similar. We can see that it's underlining here because there's a link on that. So I actually do want to have one general style for links. I definitely want to remove those underlines. So we'll take this text decoration none and we'll put that as just a general style. Cool. Alright, so that's gone. So now let's go back to our inputs and let's center them. So we gave them a width, so now we can do, and they're block level elements now, so we can do margin 0 auto to center them. And it looks like we probably do want some, at least some top, we want to push them down. So there's a couple ways we could do that, but let's just see if we can use margin to pull that off. So, alright, we can do a little further than that. Okay. I'm going to go just even further. Cool. Alright, could be better, but, you know, we're working quickly. In fact, I'll just make it a little shorter. So I'll make it 250 pixels. Sweet. Alright. This is a little bit more reasonable. Alrighty. So now let's do a couple specific styles. So search input. As you can see, the text when we enter it is kind of crammed on the left side. So let's give it a little bit of padding. Alright. When we do this though, it's hard to see it, but it actually made our search input a little bit wider, so let's correct that using box sizing as well. Alright, so now we have just a little bit of space here. That's kind of nice. I'm actually going to even bump it up to 10 pixels. There we go. It's a little more readable. So I think that is fine. So now let's do our search button, and let's give that a background color. Alright, and then let's make the font of both of these bigger. That's just a little too big. That's pretty nice. Alright, so the font on our search button is a little difficult to read, so let's make it more bold. That's a little bit better. And let's make it white. There we go, that's nice and clear. So there's more that we could do on this design. I'm pretty sure I did more on the actual version, but this is pretty decent. So now let's move over to our news. So when we click on search news, this is still pretty ugly. So let's move on to that. So I believe that was called article. Let's take a look. So yeah, we have a div and the ID is, it's actually articles plural. Alright. And then inside of that we have a bunch of article boxes, and those have images and all sorts of stuff. So first things first, I want these articles to display in a bunch of columns. And I think the easiest way to do that is with grid. So we'll use CSS grid here. And then we need to set up some information about those columns. I'm just going to create, I'm going to use FR, which if you recall, it just stands for whatever available free space there is. So this makes 3 columns, and they should all be the same width. So if I save it, and I pull up some news, alright, this looks just terrible. So it's not that we did anything wrong here, it looks like our images are just destroying everything. So we actually do have 3 columns, they're just really, really, really big, and that's our images kind of messing everything up. So let's start dealing with our actual articles. So that's going to be addressing the articles themselves. So I have article, and that wraps around all my other stuff. And just since it's really hard to see what's going on, I'm actually going to skip article for a second, and I'm going to jump to article image, and I'm going to say width 100 pixels. There we go. Okay, this is a little bit more sane. I can kind of see what's happening here. So now my images are set to, you have to specifically tell them not to expand beyond their boundaries, because they will by default just render at whatever size they are. So this is a little bit better, but everything's kind of smushed together, so let's go back to article and deal with some of that. So let's give each article a border just so we can see them better. Alright, so those are the lines. You can see our clear grid forming here. Alright. We can see that our images are different heights, which, I mean, it kind of depends on your taste. I think I want all mine to be the same, so I'm also going to provide a height. So I'll say maybe 250 pixels. Okay. And then just to help make sure that the best of each of these images is fitting inside of that box, I'm going to use object fit cover, and that should help the images kind of center within the constraints that I've given them. Alright. Now let's give a little bit of white space. So we'll do margin. I'm not going to worry about the... Actually, yeah, no, I want to worry about the top and bottom. I don't know, something like 30 pixels? That's not bad. Seems a little bit tight, but whatever. Alrighty. So that gives them a little bit of space from each other, but now the information is really crammed up against the walls here. So let's also add a little bit of padding. Alright. Cool. That's a little bit better. So now I have all my news stories here. Okay. Now I could make like specific tweaks. Maybe I don't want these to be blue. You know, there's lots of like little details that we could get into. But this is more or less like decent to look at, so I'm going to move on for right now. And I'm going to move to my footer. And like my header, I like to give my footers specific heights that don't change, so I'll do something like 100 pixels. Now let's give it a color so I can actually see it, a background color I mean. A classic white smoke. So let's look at it. Alright, so I just want that text to center, so I'll use my little line height trick. This works when you have a single line, you just set the line height as the same as the height, and there we go. It's possible that on certain screen sizes, so sort of like the H1, this P tag has its own default margin, and we can see because I set the line height to be this entire height, that margin's getting pushed here, and it's actually separating my main component and my footer. Now we can't really see that right now, but if we ever gave our main component a background color, that would look pretty bad. So let's also go footer, we'll adjust the P tag, and we'll take that margin off. There we go, and we can see how that adjusted, and that's no longer an issue. Alright. Cool. So it looks like for the most part our app is decent. There's definitely room for improvement on the styles, but it's solid enough. The only issue, we weren't seeing it right there, but let's just do a random search. We're getting a weird sizing bug. I'm not exactly sure what that's from. The bug I wanted to point to was certain news articles do not have images, and when they don't, it looks pretty crappy. So let's do some conditional rendering to figure out what's going on there. Alright. So we want to do conditional rendering so that if there is no image, it shows something else. If there is an image, it'll show the actual image. If there is not an image, it'll show something else. And so for that, we're going to want to use a ternary statement. And those will always go condition, question mark, true, false, right? So our condition is going to be if there's actually an article. Or I'm sorry, if there actually is an image. And the image is a string, and an empty string renders as false, so this is going to work out as a great condition for us. So we'll do article dot URL to image. And then if it's true, just render the image. It's pretty straightforward. And if it's false, we're going to want to render a backup image. So do image source equals, all right. And so for a backup image, I can just say image not found and try and find a suitable placeholder. Oh, okay, I kind of like this one right here. That's nice and clear. So I will copy that image address. I'm going to go into my app, and that will be what it renders if there is no image. So I go back to my app, and there we go. So for the ones that do not have an image, that's a little bit big and gaudy, but whatever, it kind of gets the point across. Oh, that's really bizarre that this one must just have... Alright, so this is an unusual exception. There is an image URL, but it's actually broken. I'm going to skip that because, as you can see, this is just a weird garbage thing. Most likely happened because I typed ASDF as my search. I don't think this would ever happen in real life, so I'm going to just ignore it for now. But if I have horrible users, I will have to deal with that. Cool, so... All right. Michigan football's offensive line dominates Notre Dame. This sounds good. This seems great. Everything's great. Alrighty. So yeah, that's basically a simple news application. And this covers a lot of the stuff that we did for Project 1. For Project 2. And so hopefully any of you who feel like you might still have a couple gaps in how React works, hopefully this helps fill in those gaps. So that is the video, and I will see you guys tomorrow.